February 1st, 1925. University girls formulate rights. Heidelberg co-ed students draw up symposium insisting on recognition. The feminist movement struck Heidelberg University today. Co-eds stamped a haughty galosh and announced a revolt against the old order of campus affairs. "We want what we want, when we want it," was the burden of their song, and leaders of the movement translated the "it" to mean 1. The right to choose their own dates. 2. The right to pay their own way to movies and parties. 3. The right to stay out as late as men and escape punishment. In brief, all, save a small minority of the co-eds, demand their emancipation. A joint YWCA and YMCA committee was appointed to investigate these alleged inequalities, and in a preliminary report said, "There is an unjust inequality between the men and the women. Men may take the initiative in choosing their friends of the opposite sex, women may not. Men are disproportionately burdened with the financial responsibility for entertainment. Women are punished for violations of rules, their male companions go free." February 2nd, 1925. Second Meat Story Contest begins soon. The second National Meat Story Contest will be opened shortly, and Washington high school girls interested in the study of home economics will be given another opportunity to compete in a story writing contest on the subject, the National Livestock and Meat Board, with headquarters in Chicago, announced today. Participating in the first contest were approximately 12,000 girls in every state of the Union, including the following Washingtonians: Olga T. Beckworth, Janet Florence Foster, Thelma Latney, Anna Miller, and Frances Whiteman. Cash prizes total $2,500. Dr. Louise Stanley of the Bureau of Economics, Department of Agriculture, headed the committee of judges for the first contest. February 3rd, 1925. Gunman plans return to farm. Diamond Jack Altery buys 4,000 acres and will quit dogging it soon. Diamond Jack Altery, noted Chicago underworld leader and reputed gunman, is tired of the hectic life of the big city and wants to live peacefully on a Colorado ranch. Altery, participant in many gun battles around Chicago and pal of Dean O'Banion, victim of an underworld feud, who was assassinated in his Chicago floral shop, has already invested in extensive acreage in the vicinity of Jar Cannon in Douglas County, 25 miles south of Denver, and he plans to renew the life of his youth as a cowboy and rancher. Altery said he planned to open a rodeo and moving picture camp on his property. He admitted, however, that his peaceful days in Colorado would not begin immediately, as he has a little business back in Chicago. "If I get a 50-50 break in Chicago, I'll be back here on the ranch in a few months," he added. "I may get bumped off when I go back there, but I'll take my chance. I don't have to steal. My income is more than I'll ever need, and besides, I hold the position of president of the Janitors Union in Chicago. I'll stay in Chicago until I get ready to leave. I'll not shake hands with anyone except my trusted friends, for no enemy will ever hold me by one hand and shoot me with the other. That was the trouble with O'Banion, he was too trustful. I'm tiring of that life though, and I want to come back here to Colorado," Altery concluded. "I'm sick of paying lawyers' fees and weary of picking up the papers to read such headlines as Altery hunted in $50,000 Gurr robbery." New York can't beat Kansas, she says. Varda Watson, Wheat Girl, avers Baghdad on the subway is nice, but... New York's skyline may be alright, but it doesn't stack up against a waving field of Kansas wheat. At least, that was the way Miss Varda Watson, the brown-haired, blue-eyed beauty from Turin, Kansas, felt about it when interviewed today, as to her impressions of little old New York. "I like your city," she said, "but I wouldn't want to live here. It's a nice place to visit, but give me Kansas every time." Miss Watson, chosen as the most popular girl in her state in a newspaper contest, was seeing the sights for a few days and telling all those within hearing that Kansas grows the best wheat in the world. Upon her arrival here from Boston, Miss Watson was given a luncheon at the Bankers Club. Kansas and Kansas wheat were the main topics under discussion, and glowing tributes to both were made in speeches by W. H. Hockaday of Wichita, Harry F. Sinclair, oil magnate, and Charles F. Price, magazine writer. Miss Watson, who is 19 years old and a freshman at Sterling College, was not to be lured from her purpose of boosting Kansas by any thought of the opposite sex. When asked if she thought the young men in the East were attractive, she blushed and replied, "I really can't say, I haven't seen any. Miss Watson will remain here for a few days and then go to Philadelphia." February 4th, 1925. Brew pleads for money for education of bees. Wants to teach them to keep out of closed cars during the summer. By Homer Brew, famous beekeeper. Well folks, the editor has asked me to write something about the 2 bee schools that will be held in King County next week. At first glance, a bee school may appear foolish, but when the matter is gone into more deeply, it will be apparent that nothing is more important than the education of our bees. Lack of space will not permit us to indicate all the things a young bee ought to know. This is a task which I shall leave to my colleague, Professor B. A. Slocum of the State College of Washington, also a famous specialist in bee education. Closed car is no place for a bee. Consider the bee in relation to the automobile. If bees can be taught to keep out of closed cars in the summer months, it will be a tremendous step forward for the automotive industry. If there is one place where a bee is unnecessary, it is in a coupe. Not only does it distract the attention of the driver, but it is also a strain on the bee's nervous system, causing him to fly around in great agitation. No, a coupe is not the place for a bee. Another thing that should be taught all bees is to use only their forward gears. Much grief has been caused to pedestrians by the habit of bees backing into people. Bees should sound klaxons. If a bee must go into reverse, he should sound his klaxon, or otherwise indicate his intention of parking on a person's epidermis. If possible, we should breed a bee with a glowworm, so that he will have a headlight as well as a rear bumper. These are just a few vagrant thoughts we offer to our readers. Ponder them well, then write to your legislator. Tell him not to cut down the levy for bee education. Next week, 10 ways to prepare dainty arsenic sandwiches for earwigs. February 5th, 1925. Dashing frontier novel, The High Grader, by William MacLeod Rain. Everyone who has ever been around a mining camp knows what a high grader is. A miner who pockets samples of rich ore and disposes of them to his own profit. He justifies the practice on the ground that nature intended her wealth to be scattered among as many people as can acquire it, and not to be kept by a few mine owners. The author does not go deeply into the ethics or economics of the matter. He is more concerned with the charming love story of Moya Dwight and Jack Kilmeny, and with a number of agreeable characters and stirring phases of Western life, every reader will be greatly interested in this tale. To be printed serially in The Organised Farmer. Movies. Yankee Speed is the story of a young man whose great athletic tendency is objectionable to his father, who has him bound, put in a freight car, and consigned to work on a ranch. He escapes, falls in with a bunch of ne'er-do-wells who are trying to defraud an heiress, defeats their purpose, gains her affections, and is handsomely rewarded by her guardian, who is not so dead as he was supposed to be. Lots of action and thrills. Kenneth MacDonald as the hero keeps things moving right along. Saturday, February 7th. February 6th, 1925. Bull leaps from car and dashes to old home. A fancy Black Angus bull was loaded at this station to be shipped to its new owner in Missouri. He had been placed in a car alone, and just as the train arrived to pick up the car, the shipper decided to take a last look to see if His Majesty was all right. He pulled the door of the car open about a foot to look in, when the bull stuck his head into the crack, gave a shrug of his massive shoulders, pushing the door wide open, and jumped out. He madly charged the conductor of the train and station, Agent George Skinkle, who was standing near. After they'd been chased up the ladder of the car of the train, the bull started for his former home on a farm nearby. It was necessary for the train to set the empty car out again, and the animal will make the trip later when he is in better spirits. February 7th, 1925. Friend in her home, husband in cellar. Quarantine brings about new setting for eternal triangle drama. Domiciled in the cellar, while a male friend of his wife is quarantined in the same apartment with her. The situation of a Bristol man whose home is on Main Street, a short distance from South Street. The friend of the wife has been paying visits to the home, so the police have been informed, and last week the outbreak of scarlet fever among the 2 small children of the family caused a quarantining of the place by Health Officer Joseph I. Woisard. Then the husband was given his choice of being quarantined in with the family and thereby ceasing to visit his place of employment daily, or of sleeping in the cellar near the furnace. As the funds for the family upkeep must continue, the husband chose the cellar with the furnace as his companion. The wife's friend appeared and saw the quarantine card, but friendship knew no barriers, and in he went. Violation of the quarantine regulations took place on several occasions, until the eagle eye of patrolman Henry Jaglinski, who has been assisting the health department, saw what was going on. The officer knocked on the door and asked if a visitor was present, but the woman indignantly denied the presence of anyone but the family, and informed the officer that if he did not take her word, he could search the house. "That I propose to do," replied the intrepid Jaglinski, and the friend was found in a clothes closet. Health Officer Weissard was called. The friend was informed that he could be quarantined at the Main Street home or at his own rooming house on Spring Street. Without any hesitation, he took the Main Street home, where he is now. Too much petting, and booze as well. The Board of Education has ruled that there shall be no more senior high school sleigh rides, because of too much petting and too many pocket flasks. The announcement of the board said their dictum was based upon observations of members and the complaints of parents. Last night, the class of 1925 closed a colourful bit of school history by riding in 4 sleighs 9 miles to Westonville. February 8th, 1925. Girl, sight restored, is overcome by beauty and wonders of nature. With her sight restored, little Viola Imore, 13 years old, is sorrowful because she cannot adequately describe the beauty of the world. "It's wonderful," she said simply, and then quite naively, "I never saw anything like it. I didn't know it could be so nice." Viola spoke from her hospital cot, where she has been confined since Thursday, when the miracle-making power of a surgeon's knife and fingers restored her sight to her. Her face was flushed with the wonder of it all. Tears showed in her eyes, unbandaged for the moment, and her hands played nervously with the coverlet as she tried to express her joy. It's nice," was the nearest she came to it. Viola and Peter Morris, 18, were taken from the State Home for the Blind at Colorado Springs 2 weeks ago by authorities of the Colorado General Hospital, and delicate optical operations performed on them. Physicians today announced the complete success of the operations and practical recovery of both patients. Yesterday, both children were taken for a tour of the mountain parks, but their attention was centred on wonders of their own choosing. The green grass beneath her feet and a stream of running water were the first 2 wonders of the world to Viola. "It's green," she said, running her fingers through the grass. "I didn't know what green was like." Peter, more self-contained than Viola, stood in a wee brick house. "I've had bricks in my hands," was his sober reflection, "but I didn't think that a brick house could look like that." On her cot in the hospital, Viola is waiting for her surgeon's release. Then she says she is going home to romp in the fields. "That trip yesterday was awful nice," she told her interviewer at parting. "It must be wonderful to do that every day." Viola and Peter have been blind from infancy. February 9th, 1925. Fax telephone girls glean. Daily conferences held after business hours in Los Angeles mount up into the thousands, according to N.R. Powley and G. DeNevers, Southern California telephone officials, who say that at around 5 o'clock every evening, several thousand businessmen call up to inform their wives that they can't get home to dinner, usually because of a conference. During the brief period between 4:45 and 5:10 p.m, the telephone girls handle more calls a minute than at any other time during the day, said Mr. Powley. The bulk of them are men calling up their wives about not being able to get home to dinner. Various other factors that make the traffic in telephone calls jump and cause switchboards to light up like the proverbial Christmas tree, said Mr. DeNevers, are fires, explosions, and radio announcers requesting listeners in to call up and let us know how you hear us. If a day opens with clear weather and rain comes up later, the number of phone calls increases unbelievably, the officials said. Everybody seems to be calling up to cancel engagements or to rent taxicabs. Checking over the 1,750,000 calls a day, the telephone operators say that the popular notion is correct. Men cannot compete with women in long conversations. Pleasant memory killed by curiosity. Marshal Patain, as a second lieutenant 40 years ago, served 2 years in a small post near Sospel on the French-Italian frontier. Second Lieutenant Bertain, whose resources were rather slim, took his meals at a modest inn kept by a young girl of remarkable beauty. Recently, Marshal Bertain, representing the French army at the unveiling of a monument to the war dead here, decided to take the trip into the mountains and visit the scene of his garrison life as a second lieutenant. The Marshal admitted to his aides that he was anxious to see how the former beauty of the inn looked after 40 years. He found both the inn and its owner grown considerably larger. 40 years had worked a great contrast, however, in their respective appearance. The inn, refreshed with paint and reconstruction, had become considerably younger, while all the paint in the world could not hide the havoc that the years had wrought upon its once fair owner. "Don't you recollect a second lieutenant called Bertain who frequented your place some 40 years ago?" the Marshal asked of the old woman at the end of the meal, when he saw that she had failed to recognise him. "Oh yes," the landlady replied simply. "Little Bertain, why, he must be at least a captain by this time." February 10th, 1925. 102 years old, she opposes dry laws. Eliza Jones Heston says they lead to drinking among girls of today. Miss Eliza Jones Heston celebrated her 102nd birthday here this week, still hale and hearty and still able to walk around without assistance. Miss Heston, who is the oldest of a family of 11 children and a granddaughter of Colonel Edward Heston of George Washington's army, has no special rules for longevity. Regular eating, healthy outdoor life, and refraining from taking medicine has been her way of reaching this remarkable age. Miss Heston declared that the modern girl cannot be compared favourably with her grandmother's, and that the pace they are now going is not conducive to longevity. "When I was a girl, we stayed at home to help our mothers," declared the centenarian. "Nowadays, the girls use their homes only to sleep in, and chase out all day in automobiles with their boyfriends. Young people walk less than we did, and therefore do not get enough exercise, which makes them less healthy and more susceptible to disease." Miss Heston is not enthusiastic about prohibition. "In my day," she continued, "there was far less drinking than now. Young girls," she declared, "neither drank liquor nor smoked cigarettes, and men were more moderate in their imbibing. I don't think a little drink harmed any man," she said. Miss Heston is a native of Philadelphia and makes her home with her niece, Miss Edith S. Hall. Kindly engineer stops train to feed pheasants. Passengers on an eastbound morning train passing Hicks Ferry, flagstop near here, have wondered for weeks why the train stopped or slowed down almost to a stop, apparently without reason. They had their curiosity satisfied when they discovered that Harry Seeley, engineer, was feeding a large flock of ring-necked pheasants wintering near the station. Seeley first saw the birds when they were running about with the old hen and decided he would feed them. Each morning he takes grain into the engine, and when he reaches Hicks Ferry, jumps off and scatters the food, climbs on the engine and goes on. The birds are tame enough for him to touch them. February 11th, 1925. Unstolen corn is family disgrace. One of the most unusual cases ever heard in Hungary recently was before the court in the little provincial town of Osli, when 8 farmer boys caught in the act were charged with walking off with 20 pounds of corn stolen from a widow named Voros. They not only pleaded not guilty, despite the fact that they admitted the theft, but produced a sealed document from the widow in which she declared that she and her daughter, Sarika, counted it an honour that Franz Kilrally, the ringleader of the 8, had considered their house worthy of this distinction. The judge was nonplussed. "I suppose the widow fears your revenge?" he asked. "No, Your Honour," Franz Kilrally replied, speaking for the group. "You see, in our part of the country, there is a custom by which every year after the corn has been harvested, a large pot of cornmeal is placed on the stove in houses where there are grown-up unmarried daughters. The lover of the oldest daughter must steal this corn. To facilitate the theft, the family leaves the house for half an hour after the cornmeal has been placed on the stove. The greatest disgrace that can happen to the family consists in the corn being left unstolen." The judge dismissed the case. February 12th, 1925. Wide Waters by Captain Dingle. The clouds rush down to greet the sea out there, and the wide green waters roll to the thundering melody of wind and rain. There were 2 strong men, and the one loved a woman and the other loved the sea. The one stood on the rain-swept deck and watched the fury of the skies. The other sat in a cabin and read the love in a woman's eyes. It was for beautiful Mary Manning to choose. Mary Manning, true-blood daughter of the ocean mists. Great, lusty brute men there were on the clipper Orontes, southward bound, and Mary Manning, a madman's plaything. Thrill follows upon thrill in this greatest of modern sea stories. Starting next week in the Star. February 13th, 1925. Hypnotist had power, but none could break it. Untrained and unknown hypnotic ability sent an East Side youth to the emergency hospital Thursday night, and a dozen of his companions are seeking to ascertain of their number it is that is endowed with the strange power. Following a rehearsal in the basement of the Summerfield Methodist Episcopal Church, the members of the cast of The Womanless Wedding, a play which will be given next Tuesday, lingered, and the conversation turned to hypnotism. All went well until it was suggested experiments be made, and Harold Jenk, 17, 605 Van Buren Street, offered his services as a subject. Everyone in the crowd attempted to place him under the spell. He was made to gaze at shiny objects. Numerous hocus-pocus passes were made before his face until, much to the consternation of the assemblage, it was found that someone's power had overcome the youth. Undoubtedly he was under a spell cast by one of the party. But, alas, no one knew who controlled the youth's wandering faculties, nor could the spell be broken. At a nearby drugstore, a restorative was administered, but without effect. The victim became hysterical, and finally police were called and the youth taken to the emergency hospital. Physicians pronounced his condition that one of nervous hysteria. Friday morning, he was able to return to his home. 13 go to prison on 13th. Richard LaBelle, Federal Deputy Marshal, left Detroit today in charge of 13 prisoners destined to Fort Leavenworth. Transportation arrangements were made before authorities noticed the date, or Mr. LaBelle declares he would not tempt fate to start with 13 on Friday the 13th. 10 of the prisoners violated the narcotic law, 2 robbed post offices, and the 13th, John Singstock, violated the Prohibition enactment, for which the judge sentenced him to 13 months. Canaries banned in dormitories of Columbia U. Under rules prohibiting musical instruments, Columbia University officials have decided Miss Frances Hawkins of Denver, Colorado, cannot keep a canary in her room in the new dormitory for women graduate students. When Miss Hawkins arrived from the West, she brought, as a pet, the cutest little mouse you ever saw. But 9 girl students, on learning her idea of a mascot, hit the roof and didn't come down to earth again until college authorities put a ban on mice. So Miss Hawkins promptly invested in a songbird, and now that must go too. February 14th, 1925. Canadians discuss secession to US. Talk of secession from the British Empire was heard in the Canadian Parliament Friday night, when opposition speakers, battling with the government, declared that if a vote were taken tomorrow in an area comprising 1/3 of the Dominion's population, it would be overwhelmingly in favour of annexation to the United States. Minister of Labour, Murdoch, told the House of Commons that it was criminal for the opposition to bring this issue into the debate. But Dr. Mannion, one of the opposition leaders, stuck to his guns, declaring that he would back the secession statement with facts. Thrifty bigamist. Charles Vaught of Evansville, Indiana, was living in perfect peace and supporting 2 wives on $35 a week, besides buying an auto, and then the police arrested him for bigamy. Babies in hold-ups. Mothers, each 18, operated for fun, police say. 2 18-year-old mothers were held today with 4 men alleged to be their accomplices in 8 hold-ups, during several of which the women had their babies with them. Mabel Robertson and Genevieve Wattier admitted, the police said, that they kept their husbands in ignorance of their operations, which they said were for fun. February 15th, 1925. Women follow giant. Van Albert, 8 feet tall, draws throngs in Germany. Giants seemingly make just as much of a hit with modern women as do sheikhs. This apparently has been demonstrated recently in Berlin by Van Albert, the celebrated Dutch colossus, who has been daily strolling along Unter den Linden, with an army of women in pursuit. Van Albert stands more than 8 feet high without his shoes, and towers so far above all other men that they seem pygmies. Women and children regard Van Albert with much more imagination than the men, say the Berlin newspapers, which advance the theory that the scores of women who follow the giant every time he leaves his automobile recall the legend of the giant in the Muggle Hills near Berlin, who is supposed to have kidnapped Lady Hertha. Girl bites bandit and regains $600 taken in hold-up. The bravery of Esther Pecoraro, 18, clerk in the private Italian bank of her father, Gennaro Pecoraro, frustrated a bold daylight highway robbery today, when an unidentified man seized a handbag in which she was taking $600 to a national bank. Though unnerved by the encounter, the clerk ran after the robber, who stumbled and fell. Leaping upon him, she fought for the bag, and by biting his hand, finally compelled him to drop it and run. February 16th, 1925. Veteran saved by dog in war pays debt by rescuing animal from death. When Horace Love, torn by machine gun bullets, was waiting for death in no man's land, a dog saved his life. Yesterday, he saved that dog. Love, now a student at Northwestern University, was severely wounded while fighting in the Argonne, when the dog, Bolivar, then working for the German Red Cross, found him, went back to surgeons and brought them to the stricken man. Later, American forces captured the position, and when Love returned home, he brought Bolivar. About a month ago, Love, with another student, lost Bolivar while on a hike. For days they searched in vain. Meanwhile, reports were brought in that a wolf had been seen. Yesterday, Love, still at his quest, was stopped by a policeman because his automobile lacked a license tag. At a suburban station, he explained his search. "Why, we've a dog like that," the sergeant said. "Caught him. It took half a dozen of us. After he'd scared folks on the roads. He looks half starved. He's scheduled to be shot in the morning." "You'll have to shoot me first," Love said. Bolivar was brought in. He was a skeleton, but he cleared the room in one bound and almost floored his master with his joyous assault. There will be no execution. Mussolini reported ill with influenza. Premier Mussolini is ill with influenza, it was announced this evening, and his physician, Dr. Bastianelli, has ordered him to take a rest. A storm at sea. There was a momentary blackness after the lightning flash, then a second flash, so swift as almost to blind the eyes. But Mary saw a figure hurtle down out of the rigging, a scream still on his lips, his poor, groping fingers catching at the black void. He fell and plunged into the sea. You'll get all the romance and thrills of the sea in Wide Waters, the Star's next novel by Captain Dingle. It starts next Monday. You know of Captain Dingle. His short stories are now running in the Saturday Evening Post. Wide Waters is one of the very finest of the novels of this distinguished nautical novelist. Wide Waters by Captain Dingle, in the Star next Monday. February 17th, 1925. Little joke on court may put 3 in prison. 2 brothers, posing as third, fool judge and sheriff. Now judge may fool them. 3 brothers who sought to play a joke on the government by changing names and then sending the wrong man to jail in connection with a liquor conviction are facing indeterminate sentences that could run up to life imprisonment as a result of the hoax. Federal agents raided the Litchi farm last October and found a moonshine manufacturing plant. Anton Litchi was the only one of the 3 brothers at home, and he gave his name as Richard Litchi. In federal court, Anton, posing as Richard, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 months in jail. A stay of 30 days was granted, and at the end of that time, George reported to the Todd County Sheriff as Richard and began serving the sentence imposed on Anton. A letter telling of the joke came into the sheriff's hands. Contempt warrants followed. Sends daughter home, takes place at party. Mrs. Stella Maciejowski, 42, of North Chicago, figuratively speaking, stepped into her daughter's boots Sunday, but all did not end well. Stella came in search of her daughter, Genevieve, 16, who had eloped with Andrew Karpinski. Papa Maciejowski took Genevieve home, but Mama decided to have Andy entertain her. While staging a party in White Eagle Hotel, Stella and her prospective son-in-law became boisterous and were arrested on disorderly conduct charges. They were each fined $25 in district court Monday. February 18th, 1925. Woman's place not always in the home. Not long ago, a woman executive in the business world was unheard of. Now they hold high offices in our greatest banks, are elected governors of our states, are sent abroad as buyers for our largest stores. In many cases, a saleswoman can outsell a salesman, are the guiding hands and heads of some of our biggest businessmen. Mrs. William Lanebeer's recent appointment as head of the Women's Banking Department of the National City Bank of New York and election of Mrs. Julius Kahn to Congress again bring to mind the marvellous things women are accomplishing in the business and political world. 12 years ago, Mrs. Lanebeer's husband was killed in a motor accident. She found it necessary to do something to support herself and children. She had never done a stroke of work as a wage earner before, but undaunted, she took hold and kept on until she reached the high position she now holds, and one that many a man would envy. There is no limit to the heights any woman with brains and initiative can reach in the business world or public life today. February 19th, 1925. Woman sentenced to jail for 30 days is censured by court. Violet Mock, arrested in a raid in West Casper Monday evening, was sentenced to 30 days in jail by Judge Murray in police court last night. The judge also took occasion to censure the woman for her repeated outbursts during the course of her trial, and to remark that he believed she was still under the influence of liquor. A.W. Boller, alleged proprietor of the restaurant in which the Mock woman was arrested, was fined $100 in costs. 2 drunks at the usual $15 per constituted the rest of the docket. "I hope you croak," Slayer told father. Mrs. Nellie Baker, young widow of Daniel Baker and divorced wife of his son, William Levi Baker, today testified at the trial of the son for the murder of his father that after the fatal shooting, when the older man was being carried out on a stretcher, the son said, "I hope you croak." The wounded man, she testified, replied, "I hope you get the chair." Mrs. Baker was the only witness of the quarrel. Obscene play to end run. District Attorney Banton announced today that William A. Brady, theatrical producer, had voluntarily agreed to withdraw from the stage next Saturday night the play A Good Bad Woman, over which a storm of criticism has raged on complaints that it is obscene and demoralising. February 20th, 1925. Punches judge at trial. Shepherd's attorney enraged during cross-examination. Chief Justice Harry Olson of the Municipal Court was punched in the face today by Edwin Hedrick, representing William D. Shepherd at the inquest into the death of William McClintock, millionaire orphan. A deputy sheriff interfered before Justice Olson could retaliate or Hedrick could strike any more blows. The fight occurred during the testimony of Estelle Gehring, pretty nurse, to whom Shepherd had written endearing letters. Justice Olson objected to certain questions, and Hedrick whirled and yelled, "You dirty rat!" Then he landed the one blow. Attorney Hedrick barely escaped a stiff right straight arm punch from Judge Olson's son, Sanford, who sprang from his seat, scrambled over 2 chairs and a table, and struck at his father's assailant. The deputy had just pulled Hedrick away. "You should be ashamed of your conduct," Deputy Coroner Charles Kennedy shouted at Hedrick. "It is a public disgrace to call a brother attorney, a man of such high position as Judge Olson, a dirty rat." Miss Gehring's testimony, which led up to the open scrap, was to the effect that Shepherd had asked young McClintock for a gift of some valuable property, but had been turned down. Isabel Pope, who was to have married McClintock, testified she had been treated badly by the Shepherds, who objected to the romance. Chaplin describes rise, sues for injunction against use of baggy makeup. Charlie Chaplin took the witness stand in a crowded courtroom today and told how he became the world's foremost screen comedian. Chaplin is suing for an injunction to restrain Charles Amador, alias Charles Applin, from using his little black moustache, baggy pants, and leaky shoes as stage property. The comedian bases his entire reputation on the use of this makeup, he told the court, and claimed it was his own peculiar creation. February 21st, 1925. Producers defy Spicy Play's foes. Brady changes mind, refuses to withdraw Good Bad Woman. Complications have developed in Broadway's spicy play epidemic, which District Attorney Banton and numerous civilians are trying to stamp out. Producers of Desire Under the Elms by Eugene O'Neill have refused to consider Mr. Banton's instructions to withdraw the play by next Wednesday and say they will invite prosecution. After David Bolesko had promised to rewrite his two productions Under Fire, The Harem and Ladies of the Evening, and to present the expurgated versions next Tuesday, William A. Brady, whose A Good Bad Woman brought the first rain in the present storm of public disapproval, and whose voluntary offer to withdraw the play after tonight's performances had apparently calmed the waters, stirred up a fresh commotion by declaring he would not withdraw it. "I do not propose to be a goat," Mr. Brady said. "I started out to do something for the American theatre, but if others are allowed by the authorities to present filthy plays, I as a taxpayer claim the same privilege. If the New York stage is to be made clean, I will go to the limit to bring it about, but I will not submit to unfairness." Mr. Brady said he would rewrite A Good Bad Woman and continue its run next Monday. Meanwhile, the proponents of censorship by a jury of playgoers are trying to get it in operation in time to prevent serious casualties by court action. Shoots father-in-law is wounded in duel. Youth and wife's father renew argument over elopement while at basketball game. John L. Perkins was shot and instantly killed, and his son-in-law, Frank Kane, seriously wounded yesterday in a duel the two men engaged in while spectators at a basketball game. The men met on the campus of the high school and renewed a quarrel that had preceded the elopement of Kane and Perkins' daughter last November. When Kane and Miss Perkins announced their intention to be married, Perkins made objections and a fistfight resulted. The pair eloped and were married, and the father-in-law, it is said, became reconciled. Girls, here's a chance for riches. Alfred T. Blake, a fox farmer of Wilkie, Saskatchewan, will become the owner of estates in England and Scotland valued at $648,000 if he complies with stipulations set down by his late uncle, Arthur G. Blake, in his will. One of the requirements is that the heir shall be married before January 1st, 1930. Another, that he visit the spot in South Africa where his father was killed in the Boer War. And a third is that he visit his mother's birthplace at Umboldt, India. February 22nd, 1925. Two mothers, ideal way to rear child, novelist says. Two mothers for every child. Impossible, you say? To be sure, but it would be the ideal way to raise a youngster, according to Lucille Van Slyke, novelist. One of the mothers should have the homemaking instinct, and the other the ambition for a career, she thinks. To the care of the former, the child would be entrusted during its infancy, and to the latter during adolescence. Your essentially material woman, all tenderness and solicitation, always on hand with the liniment and kisses when the children stub their toes, is undoubtedly ideal for one's babyhood, says Mrs. Van Slyke. The modern businesswoman, disciplined and sharpened by contact with the problems of livelihood, more calculating than her more feminine sister, is not apt to coddle her children in their early years. She looks to the future of her children, and she knows a few hard knocks will benefit them. She makes her children more self-reliant. The difficulty is that the traditional type of ideal mother, who sacrifices her own ambitions and development for her children, projects herself into the child's world. She goes back and they go forward. Eventually they meet and pass each other. To such a mother, her children are always babies, so she does not grasp their mature problems. Fortunately, Mrs. Van Slyke says, nature makes a compensation here. The father, who took no particular pride in his children during their teething and croup stages, suddenly becomes intensely interested in the child who asks the way of things. As the mother mourns the lost baby, the father greets his child as an equal. Mrs. Van Slyke has just written a new novel, Nora Pays, which is the story of a modern merchant princess. The merchant of today is quite as apt to be a princess as a prince, she maintains. You need only walk along Fifth Avenue and see the shops owned and operated by a woman to realise this. But it isn't surprising. There are generations of good business instincts bottled up in the women of this country. On the farm did his mother, who has kept the books and had her own butter and egg business. She advises father about his crops and expenditures. That is why the businesswoman is not new, and hence presents no new problem. We have always had her, and she has always been the type who made the far-sighted, unsentimental mother. February 23rd, 1925. Woman, 80 years old, objects to being called 88. 8 years added to your age when you are a woman who admits the age of 80 is as unwelcome as though you were 20, declares Miss Mary B. Ferry, curator of the State Pioneer and Historical Collection housed in the State Administrative Building here. Mrs. Ferry made the remark in commenting on a report of one of her speeches at Bay City, in which a Bay City newspaper, through a typographical error, credited her with being 88 years old. Mrs. Ferry, in her addresses to women's clubs and noonday luncheon clubs throughout the state, tells her audience that if they are going to give her the assistance she asks, they will have to hurry, as she is now 80 years old and has no time to waste. Despite her advanced years, she regularly takes the platform at various meetings to describe the work she and her assistants are doing in gathering for the state miscellaneous relics, which now and in the future will give the student an insight into the pioneer days of Michigan. Guilty of slaying. William Levi Baker was convicted by a jury tonight of the murder of his father, Daniel Baker, and sentenced to from 20 years to life in prison. The chief witness against Baker was his divorced wife, who had subsequently married his father. February 24th, 1925. Fake mayor's orders have stopped all noisy parties. The curt and peremptory demand, backed up by a squad of policemen to cut the noise or you're going to take a ride in the wagon, has stopped more than one party in respectable and orderly apartment houses here recently. The demand was always followed with the statement, "Those are the orders from the mayor himself." The party always stopped, and tearful and embarrassed hostesses were humiliated and shamed before their guests, and wondered at the new order for things. Now it develops that the orders from the mayor were telephoned to police by imposters, actuated either by a desire to obtain a good night's rest or as a grudge against occupants of the same apartment house. As a result, Mayor Tyler has asked the city attorney to frame an ordinance to cover such impersonation of a city official, and future telephone orders to police to stop the noise at a party will go unheeded unless the person's identity is known. February 25th, 1925. Want a pet? Try sea lions. The sea lion is the ideal pet and the perfect friend of man, according to recommendations made by members of the Amateur Menagerie Club, who published recently a book on their various experiences with animals. Owing to the expense of the upkeep of a sea lion, however, it is not probable that they will ever replace cats and dogs as pets. A sea lion has all the intelligence of a dog, adaptability and affection, and requires no license, but ordinarily it costs from $500 to $700 a year to keep a pet of this kind. One of the club members, L.R. Brightwell, has had much experience with sea lions as pets and highly recommends them. In his opinion, it is only the high rate for the use of water and the cost of fish as food which prevents the sea lion becoming a universal pet. Greed is undoubtedly the sea lion's one great fault, writes Mr. Brightwell, but given enough fish, a sea lion may be taught anything. His amazing gifts of balancing, diving, and forming picturesque groups are implanted in him by nature. February 26th, 1925. Mr. Reader, is Bobby your dog? Is this your dog? Nicknamed Bobby, this male collie is being held by the Poundmaster for its owner. He was found on Wisconsin Avenue last week. Pound employees have become so attached to Bobby, they have refused to sell or dispose of him. Such a good dog must have a good master, they say. If you're the owner, hurry and claim Bobby. Bobby made friends at Pound. No one there has heart to dispose of him. Owner is sought. The heart of hard-hearted Hannah would have softened if she'd been around Bobby for a few days. That's what employees of the District Pound declared today in explaining why Bobby, a male collie picked up in the 3200th block of Wisconsin Avenue Northwest last week, has not gone to his death. Rules and regulations of the Pound to the contrary, Bobby will not be killed. He has won the hearts of Pound employees and they have all declined to take part in any last rites for the dog. Bobby was only in the Pound a few hours before he had made friends. Within 24 hours he had won the heart of every employee. So when 48 hours passed, the length of time unclaimed dogs are kept, none of the Pound employees was willing to kill or sell him. Let's keep him until we find the owner, someone just suggested. The suggestion was accepted. Now Bobby is well taken care of. We're going to find his master, Pound employees declared today. He had no means of identification when we found him, but we know a good dog like Bobby must have had a good home. We're going to find his master. The name Bobby was given the dog by Pound employees. If Bobby is your dog, you can get him back by applying at the District Pound, South Capitol and I Streets. Woman Salon could wed easily. Wisconsin girl in legislature gets many proposals of marriage. Being an assemblywoman has one disadvantage, especially when she is single, 23 and pretty. That is the experience of Miss Mildred Barber, one of the state's first fair lawmakers. Since assuming her seat as a member of the Badger Assembly, Miss Barber has received no less than a dozen proposals of marriage from various parts of the country. Thus far, Miss Barber has given no consideration to the proposals, declaring that she is too busy in politics to think of wedding bells. A young man from Clay Center, Kansas, wrote Miss Barber as follows: "I am still single, but they say there is a chance for everybody. What do you think about it? Would you please send me one of your photos? I will send you one of mine if you wish." From Portland, Oregon, a lonesome young swain wrote, "If you do not consider it exceptionally bold on my part, may I ask for your hand? At least let us exchange letters and become real friends." Down in Madison, Georgia, a man who says he is 77 years young asks Miss Barber for her picture so he can frame it. "I hear you would like to be married," writes a young would-be hubby from Rice Lake, Wisconsin. "When would you desire to do this? I would like to get married to a nice girl like you. Name the day." February 27th, 1925. 12 masters lay claim to lovable collie. Bobby, the lovable collie who has won the hearts of employees of the District Pound, has found his master. 12 masters, in fact. Hardly had copies of the Washington Times carrying a photograph of Bobby come off the press yesterday when Walter R. Smith, District Poundmaster, began to receive telephone calls. "It's my dog," one sweet young voice said. "He's mine," another declared. "I'm sure he's mine," telephoned a third. And so through the day. Dr. William C. Fowler, District Health Officer who supervises the pound, was called last night by Mrs. Eli Helmick, wife of General Eli Helmick. She told him she believed the collie was her dog. Meanwhile, Poundmaster Smith spent several hours last night exhibiting Bobby. This morning, more masters came to claim. "I think the dog belongs to Mrs. Helmick," Dr. Fowler said today. Mrs. Helmick visited the pound this morning. Bobby rushed up to her. However, Poundmaster Smith is not letting Bobby go until he's certain as to the real owner. So this afternoon, Poundmaster Smith will hold court. "If you think Bobby's your dog, come down here this afternoon," he tells inquirers. "We are going to get everybody together and decide who's the real owner." Mr. Smith is undecided just what method to use in identifying Bobby's owner. "I can't use the old method of giving the dog to the one to whom he runs," he said. "Bobby is such a friendly dog that he answers to any name. He's affectionate with everybody." Bobby was picked up on the Wisconsin Avenue last week. He was such a good-looking and friendly dog that pound officials decided to keep him until his owner was found. The usual course is to kill or sell them after 48 hours if they are unclaimed. Bobby is living because he makes friends so quickly. He won the hearts of every pound employee. Mrs. Helmick says that everybody in the neighbourhood of her home, Garfield Street Northwest, has been hunting for the dog. She says she can identify him by a growth on the left eye. Several years ago, Mrs. Helmick had a fight in the courts here over the ownership of a dog. The animal was claimed by Mrs. Helmick and another man. The court awarded the animal to Mrs. Helmick when it showed greater affection for Mrs. Helmick than the other claimant. Mrs. Helmick says her dog's name is Boy. She declares the dog's real master is in Europe and she is caring for him. Another claimant from Virginia has a photograph of a dog which is said to resemble Bobby. February 28th, 1925. Paris women display ears. Women's ears, long hidden under successive fashions in hairdressing, are to brave the full light of day once again. The rediscovery of the ear really began with the revival of the earring some time ago. As the earrings grew longer and longer, 9 and 10-inch earrings which touch the shoulder are to be seen in jewellers' windows, the lobe itself began to peep out from under the side pieces of hair which every woman, shingled or long-haired, wore. Gradually, more and more of the long-lost ear revealed itself, until, in the latest fashions in Parisian coiffeurs, the ear is completely revealed. Kills 27 rattlesnakes with dynamite blast. Friends of E.G. Hubbard thought he had been drinking when he told them he had killed 27 rattlesnakes at one shot. But he hadn't. He had. When Hubbard located a large den of rattlers on his ranch, he planted 4 sticks of dynamite in the cave where they had taken refuge, and touched off the charge. Reptiles were blown 100 feet into the air.